Here you don't know. I'm going to explain what kind of people can come to Japan and what countries people the Japanese government will give permission to enter into Japan very roughly. So if you want to know the details of this information, please check and visit the webpage of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. I will paste the link of it in the description box below. First thing first, to understand if you can come to Japan or not, the first thing you must know is whether Japan will grant visa to the people in your country. So there is strict country classification standard in terms of whether Japan will accept people from the country under the border measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus infection. So there are roughly three types of country based on the strict country classification standards by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. So which are designated countries or non-designated countries or rejected countries. Designated countries are the ones with the recognition the Japanese government must keep a lookout for these countries with the border measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus infection. So people from this country have to stay for at least 3 days at the place designated by the quarantine station chief, no matter whether you already have been vaccinated in your country beforehand. So Japan will accept the people from this country, but Japan had the feeling of caution against people from these countries. Non-designated countries are the one other than designated countries and rejected countries. So Japan will accept these countries without hesitation. Rejected countries are literally the ones to be denied permission to land on Japan in the first place. So people from the country designated as a rejected country by the Japanese government can't even enter into Japan until the coronavirus infection settles down. The countries that correspond to designated countries are Egypt, Korea, and Pakistan and Turkey, Russia, and Sri Lanka. And the countries that correspond to rejected countries are too many countries. So I will paste the link of web pages that discloses the list of rejected countries in the description box below. The purpose of non-Japanese stay in Japan is limited to business or employment, no matter whether you are short-term residents or long-term residents. So you can't come to Japan and you can't stay in Japan for the purpose of sightseeing, just remember. So prior to coming to Japan, you need to find a recipient organization that looks after you and supervise you. So if you're going to work for a Japanese company, your employer will become your recipient organization. And if you come to Japan for your business, you will need to find organization that becomes your recipient organization, or you need to ask a partner companies to become your recipient organization to enter into Japan beforehand. So because the Japanese government will require to find your recipient organization that will submit the certificate of acceptance of entrant to make you enter into Japan beforehand. So your recipient organization has to input your personal information online and agree on commitment form. And finally, the certificate of acceptance of entrance is issued that gives you permission to stay in Japan. You're obliged to submit the certificate of negative test to quarantine station that you obtained within 72 hours before you leave your country. If you can't submit this certificate to the quarantine station, there is a case that your entrance may not be accepted based on the quarantine law. Firstly, you are required to sign a commitment form that will ask you if it is okay for you to stay in accommodation for a certain period for quarantine inspection, and provides your location information when you arrive in Japan. So if there is violation of oath, your name and details of oath violation are disclosed publicly, and your visa is likely to be cancelled and you're likely to be deported back to your countries. So if you can't sign on the commitment form, and if you can accept the commitment form, you are required to stay at the place designated by the quarantine station chief. So the treatment difference between the people from designated countries and people from non-designated countries after entering into Japan is, frankly speaking, the amount of waiting days for quarantine inspection after you arrive in Japan. And when you arrive at the airport, coronavirus inspection will be conducted. If you are from a designated country and you have not been vaccinated, you're going to have to stay at a quarantine facility for about 3 days for quarantine inspection. And if you are from a designated country and you have been vaccinated, you're going to have to stay at home for 3 days, and you have to conduct self-inspection by yourself. If you are tested positive, you will submit the result to Health Monitoring Center for overseas entrance. And if you are tested positive, you have to contact to the health center and ask for instructions. So if you are from designated countries and you have been vaccinated but you reject receiving inspection at the airport, you're going to have to stay at a quarantine facility for about 7 days. And if you are from a non-designated country, you have not been vaccinated, you're going to have to stay at home for 3 days, and you have to conduct self-inspection by yourself, and you are tested negative, you will submit the result to Health Monitoring Center for overseas entrance. And if you're positive, if you tested positive, you have to contact your health center and ask for instructions. And if you are from non-designated countries and you have not been vaccinated but you reject receiving inspection at the airport, you're going to have to stay at a quarantine facility for about 7 days. And if you are from non-designated countries and you have been vaccinated, you're not going to have to stay at home or at a quarantine facility. While you stay at home or quarantine facility, you are restricted from using public transportation. As the exceptional measures, the countries and regions where a new variant of coronavirus except for Omicron has become dominant will be designated by the Japanese government, and people from that country have to stay at home or in designated accommodation and be restricted from using public transportation for about 14 days after arriving in Japan. The validity of visa that was issued before December 2021 is under suspicion except for the visa status of Japanese spouse or permanent resident spouse or diplomat as one of the emergency evacuation measures from the viewpoint of prevention of spread of coronavirus infection in Japan. So in the same way, visa exemption arrangement to the countries is now under suspicion. So if you want to come to Japan, although you have a visa issued before December 2021, you have to newly get another visa in the category of business or employment in Japan.